Hello and welcome back. We have talked a lot about a number of different topics over the course of the last 2.5 days relating to finance, or relating to technology, relating to digitalization, fuels, of course, in the last session. Now, one of the areas that we're going to actually talk about is how, when you've got ideas, when you've got something that has got potential, has really got a way forward, how are we going to scale up novel ideas? How do we go from concepts to sort of a project that's going to work? How do we get those projects and make them big, and make them part of the solution, the transition that we're going to have to do? I've got a panel of 5 experts who I'm going to bring up onto the stage. But first, of course, is Hege Erkland from NCE Maritime Cleantech. You're going to be competing against yourself now, Hege, because they're over there and you're here. So
thank you, Craig. Nice to be at this stage also. Yeah, this is the big question, how to scale up novel ideas to commercial success. First, I'll give you a little bit background of Maritime Cleantech. We are one of the most complete commercial hubs of maritime companies. We have approximately 150 partners, and we are all focusing on developing, demonstrating, and scaling up energy-efficient, low and zero-emission solutions to the waterborne industry. And these partners are standing behind some of those innovation projects you can see behind me here, and where the cluster also have had a specific role in facilitating, initiating, and also being part of the project when it's up and running. And here you can see many different vessels in different markets. And at this stage, it's crucial to develop and demonstrate a lot of new energy carriers on board ship, different kinds of ships, because no one knows for sure today what will be the future fuel. There's no silver bullet. So we need to develop and validate this technology to be able to scale it up at the next step. And also, of course, to ensure that this technology is safe and can be regulated. One of the best examples of how to scale up and commercialize new technology is the story of Ampere. Ampere was launched in 2015 as a result of a public-private partnership. And this ferry has paved the way for battery electric propulsion on car ferries and passenger ferries along the Norwegian coast. So now there are approximately 80 electrical ferries along the coast. And since Ampere showed that this is possible back in 2015, all new public tenders have strict environmental criteria in the tenders, so that now we are sure that this technology actually is working and is safe and proven. And it's ready also to transfer to other shipping segments. Another important aspect when it comes to scaling up new technology is the availability of new and green fuels. And this is a picture of a new bunkering station, which were recently launched as a result of a collaboration between Yara and Asan. And they are now setting up 15 new fueling stations along the Norwegian coast. So now that more energy-demanding ships can also run without emissions when they run on green ammonia. So actually these partners have solved the critical chicken and egg problem. Now the fuel will be available and we are ready to go for green ammonia. My third example of how to scale up novel technology is the political decision which was made in the Norwegian Parliament back in 2018. And then the Norwegian Parliament asked the government to have zero emission requirements in the Norwegian heritage fjords. And that was a quite ambitious decision made by the Parliament. And of course, there has been many discussions in the industry if this is possible. Can this be done? Can large ships sail without emissions into the fjords? And 2026 is not so far ahead of us, so we need to start this development now. And now I'm very happy to see that this resolution made by the Parliament has resulted in two different concepts launched by industry. One of our cluster partners, Northern Explorer, are now having ambitions to build 14 zero-emission cruise ships who will enter the World Heritage Fjords. And also, Viking Cruises are planning to use zero-emission technology, and it will be hydrogen and fuel cells. So this, I think, is a very great examples of how regulations and are setting up the right framework so that we can scale up novel technologies. So that's just a brief introduction to the topic, Craig.
Thank you, Hege. A lot of that was based around having the state, the government support in all of this, isn't it? I know that's been very instrumental in what's been growing in Norway. You've been able to grow and develop a lot of the technologies based on things that the government have mandated, whether it be the emissions within the fjords, or whether it's Innovation Norway or Innova being a significant part of that journey. So they're able to sort of put the funds in. I know a long time ago there was the Norway's NOx fund. Started off as a tax, then got called a fund.
They are still existing, up and running.
Still existing.
Yes.
But that is seen internationally as one of the big success stories, because the way that worked is it incentivized ship owners to install technologies and even helped them with the financing of installing that, and that is being seen as part of the way to transition. So how do you see Norway leading this? Do you see other governments starting to follow Norway's proactive approach?
I think what we are seeing, that the plans from EU is definitely quite ambitious and is maybe not following, but leading the way also towards cleaner shipping. And setting new requirements for fuel, for instance, is a very good incentive for the industry to move forward to greener shipping.
But you think very much there needs to be that carrot and stick element, because regulations are more like the stick in a way, because that comes with punishment for non-compliance, but the carrot is that financial support, that ability to de-risk some of the decisions.
Yes, it's a combination, of course, and I think when it comes, but it also differs between the different technologies. For instance, battery electric propulsion. That's a technology which now is commercial viable without support in several segments, because you have a lower energy cost using the battery than using, for instance, fossil fuels.
Good. Can I invite the other panelists to come up now, please? Because I want to broaden this conversation out, because I want to bring in, particularly from, we got Jennifer here, who's come all the way from Washington State. If you'd like to stand with them, Hege, as well. Jennifer's come all the way from Washington, where with in the Washington Blue Maritime Blue, sorry, it's called, and they got a lot of it. I'm going to be talking to you about how some of the ideas are sort of very, very unique. And the one idea, I've just got ants in my head. I'm going to get into that story in a minute about how ants are part of the shipping solution. EcoShip, with the vessel design, I think a lot of people have seen the pictures over the years. We'll come back to that in a second about what goes into that and how you can get the kind of new technologies into something like that. Obviously, the Green Shipping Program, Narve, we're going to talk a little bit about that, because that has been very instrumental in giving the confidence for some of the technology companies. And of course, Leif, you're a success story here. You're one of the that demonstrates that this is what can be done. Here comes an idea, and now we're going. So I'm going to get you to tell your life story in a second, but I want you to encapsulate it in about, I don't know, 30 seconds. Okay, but I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to go now because we've talked about what's going on in Norway. So I'm going to come back in a minute to the green shipping program. I'm going to go to Washington and what you've got there, because you've developed a program, but this is why I asked Hege particularly about learning from other places and getting that sort of government support. I get the impression that it's a fairly new thing in the USA to actually start doing this. How is the US looking at this? Is it state by state? Is there federal kind of goals and objectives here? Can you just give me a picture about how in the US this sort of scaling up of maritime solutions is being perceived and where state funding is coming into it?
Yeah, so Washington Maritime Blue is a cluster organization like NCE Maritime Cleantech, and actually we call them our sister cluster. We signed an MOU for collaboration, and really the model of what we're doing is drawn largely from the clean tech model in Norway, the cluster model, the joint innovation projects, as well as the Green Coastal Shipping Program. DNV actually helped develop the Maritime Blue Cluster and really leveraged global models of what was happening. But it was very new to the United States. The concept of a cluster had to be explained on every initial speaking engagement that we were on about this. But now that has changed. The cluster model is growing across the US. In Washington State, we actually have launched now 9 new clusters modeled after Maritime Blue, and we actually have Norwegian consultants helping to inform on the cluster model. But all of that happened with a lot of state support. So while we are an independent nonprofit cluster that crosses industry, government, academia, and our local community organizations, it was launched out of the State Department of Commerce. So it started with our governor having the foresight with his strong focus on decarbonization to do a strategy for the blue economy. And then we were launched as the independent cluster organization to implement that strategy. And part of it is these joint innovation projects. So we had state support from Department of Commerce, and the federal government came in through the Federal Department of Commerce to support both the strategy and the cluster organization. And now we also have support from our ports, which in Washington are government authorities, our local cities, our counties. They're all engaged in our joint innovation projects directly as members, as part of those partnerships, but also providing some seed funding that we often find federal match for. I'd say the federal leadership on this front has evolved with the new administration. Right. So we're starting to see more and more statements around this, but also more actual focus on maritime decarbonization. The latest infrastructure bills that passed have a lot of specific funding for ferry electrification, for hydrogen. It's the first time we've really seen clear grants and other authorities that are starting to come in place at the federal sector to really enable this to happen.
And you bring in different organizations to form ideas. How do you formulate that? How do you go from having a cluster of different companies into kind of associations or ports or whatever, to actually saying, oh, here's an idea, who wants to be on this one? You know, who wants to be taking part? And so how do you create the incentives to be part of some sort of trial, test, experiment, whatever you want to call it? How do you go about pushing that?
So I think the foundation really started with our strategy process, because it was a year-long stakeholder process where we brought together not only the maritime industry, but government players, utility partners, and others. And we really focused not on the challenges, and we tried to whiteboard when there was a challenge, like let's get that up there and out of the way, but on solutions. Where when you can sit around the table and mix those different organizations and cross sectors together, we found some really win-win solutions on projects that could solve those challenges. And so we had that as the seed, and then through some of the inspiration of seeing the joint innovation projects in Norway, Some of our companies said, you know, we have a new concept for a new ferry, for example. And they said, maybe we should do this as a joint innovation project. We're still at a very early concept design stage. And instead of doing this in a silo as just a design entity for the naval architecture side, we added in multiple partners so we could work on parallel paths and accelerate that. Figuring out the right route, figuring out the operator, figuring out the environmental impacts, the economic impacts. All of these pieces and parts came together through the different partners. They all had different value propositions of what they were really looking for, but together we could meet those value propositions faster. And we could find seed funding from local to eventually enable the federal funding that allowed us to go through to the full design process, and now we're applying for funding of the vessel itself. So it's about finding those win-win solutions and having that foundation of trust that you can come together and really build and accelerate by doing this together.
I think these are very much sort of incubator projects as well, aren't they? And this is where the ants come in. Because this one, if you go into the woods and you find a pile of wood ants and you put your hand over the wood ants and then you smell your hands, have you all done that? I bet you did as kids. And you smell your hands and it smells of formic acid.
Formic acid.
There's an experiment, a trial you're running in Washington using formic acid as a potential fuel. Explain why I'm now thinking ants to ships.
So yes, there's a new commercialization company that has some technology that actually captures carbon dioxide to combine with hydrogen, and through an electrolysis process, instead of directly making hydrogen, makes formic acid. Well, formic acid can be stored in a steel tank at room temperature. It's already actually in the supply chain for other purposes, and so it enables it as a liquid hydrogen carrier. So the idea is, if we can produce formic acid at scale, could this be a future maritime fuel for being able to move hydrogen in an easier way? To be able to demonstrate it, we also needed an end use. So our local utility, Tacoma Power, is really forward-leading on using their grid for decarbonization, for electrification, and for generation of hydrogen. They have the first in the nation electro-fuel tariff to actually encourage electrolysis in the region, and they're already 98% carbon-free on their grid. So they are leading on an application we just submitted to build a hydrogen fuel cell, but that will be mobile, mounted on a truck, and it can move from berth to provide shore power. Well, that enables the utility to avoid building a substation at every berth, and we'll use the formic acid to show the demonstration of how it can work. So by putting together these partners, we found the business case that would work at different levels. Even though the project has different technology readiness levels and demonstration, we then pair the government funding with what those different levels are to put it all together and make it happen.
How does that marry with the green shipping project, Nave? Because when you've got a number of different companies, organizations that are in the green shipping program, and recently I've been talking to one of the kind of growing success stories are there with Orca development, which I gather kind of originated within the program, when two of the cargo owners kind of got talking and found they had common needs. Do you see that being part of kind of bringing in embryonic ideas, or are you looking at more maturity in terms of solutions here?
I think we have a bit different approach. First of all, the Green Shipping Program is a public-private partnership program, but also a tool for green competitiveness. And we have started up 42 pilots. 14 of them are realized or under realization. And Orca Vit, which you mentioned, that got subsidized from Enova yesterday of more than 100 million Norwegian kroner, 118 million Norwegian kroner. So we never start up a pilot without having a pilot